A political dynasty shattered in a single day. One woman's private heartbreak exploded into a national firestorm, threatening to bring down the White House itself. This is the story of Mary Nevins Blaine, the Gilded Age heiress whose divorce exposed the dark underbelly of American power and destroyed a presidency. By the end of this story, you will understand how a single family scandal could alter the course of American history. We will uncover the secret affairs, the courtroom drama, and the political conspiracy that turned a wife's grievance into a weapon. How much damage can one person's private life truly inflict on the highest office in the land? America was a nation of dazzling extremes. On one side of the social chasm stood industrial titans who built marble palaces along Fifth Avenue, their fortunes forged in steel and railroads. On the other side, millions of immigrants crowded into tenements, fueling the very machines that created this staggering new wealth. This was the Gilded Age, an era veiled in a thin layer of gold that hid a core of profound social tension. It was within this crucible of new money and old ambition that a peculiar transatlantic trade flourished. American millionaires had everything money could buy, but they lacked the one thing it seemingly could not: centuries of aristocratic lineage. Across the ocean, British nobles held crumbling castles and venerable titles, but their coffers were empty. The solution was a simple exchange: a daughter for a deed. A wave of young American heiresses, nicknamed dollar princesses, were shipped off to marry into the British peerage, trading their father's wealth for a noble title and a place in the highest echelons of European society. While these women were bartered for coronets abroad, a different kind of ambition thrived at home. For politically powerful American families like the Blaines, the ultimate prize was not a dukedom in England, but the White House in Washington. Their currency was not just money, but influence, legacy, and a name that could command a nation. This created a fascinating divergence in the aspirations of the elite, setting the stage for a clash where the worlds of high society and raw political power would violently collide. At the very heart of this American political ambition stood one man, James Gillespie Blaine. To his legions of supporters, he was the plumed knight, a charismatic orator whose magnetic personality and political savvy made him a force of nature. For decades, Blaine was a central figure in Washington, serving as Speaker of the House, a United States Senator, and Secretary of State. He was the Republican Party's great hope, its nominee for president in the bitterly contested election of 1884. By his side stood his formidable wife, Harriet Stanwood Blaine, a fiercely intelligent woman who was not merely a political spouse, but an active partner in his career. Together, they were not just a couple. They were an institution, the architects of a political dynasty whose influence reached into every corner of the nation's capital. Their home was a salon for the powerful, their name synonymous with Republican ideals. The White House was the final, logical step for the Blaine legacy, a prize that seemed almost within their grasp. But every dynasty has its heirs, and the future of the Blaine name rested on the shoulders of their children, who were expected to uphold the family's impeccable public image at all costs. Into this world of established political royalty stepped a new kind of American princess. Mary Nevins was the daughter of a Cleveland industrialist whose fortune was not inherited, but earned in the booming furnaces of the Midwest. Her father, Henry Nevins, had built his wealth from the ground up, a classic Gilded Age story of ambition and industry. The Nevins family represented new money, a class that possessed immense financial power, but often felt like outsiders looking in at the old, guarded social circles of the East Coast elite. Mary was raised with every advantage that fortune could provide: an education befitting a lady of her station, and an introduction into society designed for one primary purpose: to secure a brilliant marriage. She was celebrated for her striking beauty and her sharp intellect, a combination that made her one of the most sought-after young women in her social sphere. Yet, for all her advantages, her pedigree lacked the political lineage that families like the Blaines had cultivated for generations. When Mary Nevins entered the glittering ballrooms of high society, she was not just a beautiful young woman. She was a symbol of a new American dynasty, one built on industrial wealth rather than political legacy. Her path was set to cross with that of the Blaine family, a collision that would test whether new money could truly merge with old power, or if the difference in their foundations would ultimately cause everything to crack. The union of Mary Nevins and Walker Blaine was more than a marriage. It was the consolidation of an American empire. In a ceremony that captivated the nation's society pages, the daughter of Cleveland industry was joined with the scion of Washington's foremost political dynasty. Every detail was meticulously planned to project an image of flawless unity. Mary, the radiant bride, embodied the fresh vitality of new money, her beauty and poise a testament to her father's commercial triumph. Walker, the groom, stood as the proud inheritor of a name steeped in public service and national influence. On the surface, it was the perfect Gilded Age match, a brilliant fusion of wealth and power designed to strengthen both families' legacies. The celebration was a spectacle of opulence, attended by senators, industrial barons, and foreign dignitaries, all bearing witness to what appeared to be a fairy tale. Here was the plumed knight's son securing a future funded by the vast resources of the Nevins fortune, while the Nevins family gained the social prestige and political access that only the Blaine name could provide. For a brief, glittering moment, it seemed like a flawless transaction, a merger that promised to create an unassailable American dynasty. But behind the facade of the perfect match, what private realities were these two young people expected to ignore? But behind the closed doors of their elegant home, the gilded frame of their marriage began to splinter. The pressures of public life and private expectation created a chasm between Mary and Walker Blaine that their public smiles could no longer conceal. Walker, living in the long shadow of his famous father, was reported to be a restless and unfaithful husband, seeking solace in the company of other women. Mary, accustomed to a life of modern comforts and intellectual engagement, found herself trapped in a lonely union, her unhappiness growing with each rumored indiscretion. This was not the partnership of equals she had been promised. The tensions between them simmered, a private war fought in hushed arguments and strained silences, all carefully hidden from the society pages and political gossips. Every public appearance was a performance, a necessary act to shield the Blaine family's most valuable asset, its pristine public image. The entire political machine depended on the illusion of a perfect domestic life, a foundation of moral integrity from which James G. Blaine could launch his final bid for the presidency. How long could Mary continue to play her part in this carefully staged production, silencing her own heartbreak for the sake of a family legacy that was beginning to feel like a gilded cage? The facade finally shattered in a single, decisive legal filing. In 1890, Mary Nevins Blaine walked into a New York City courtroom and did the unthinkable. She sued her husband, Walker Blaine, for divorce on the grounds of adultery. The court documents did not mince words. They named a specific woman as Walker's co-respondent, detailing a pattern of infidelity that ripped away any pretense of a happy marriage. This was not a quiet legal separation. It was a public declaration of war. The news did not trickle out. It exploded across the front pages of newspapers from Washington to San Francisco. Headlines screamed of the scandal, and the intimate details of the Blaine family's private life were suddenly the talk of every drawing room, club, and political backroom in the nation. The shock was not merely about a failed marriage. It was about the target. James G. Blaine, the plumed knight, was once again a leading contender for the Republican presidential nomination. His entire political brand was built upon the image of a stable, moral, and unified American family. His son's very public divorce, with its sordid accusations, struck directly at that foundation. How could the public trust a man to lead the country if he could not even control his own household? The question became a weapon in the hands of his political enemies, who seized upon the scandal as proof of a deeper moral rot within the Blaine dynasty. The private heartbreak of a young woman had instantly become the most dangerous threat to the highest political office in the land. The woman named in the divorce papers was a figure from their own social world, a detail that made the betrayal cut even deeper. Her name was Mrs. Lillian Boardman, a married woman whose husband was a prominent New York banker. This was not a dalliance with an actress or a woman of the demi-monde. It was an affair that cut across the very fabric of their privileged circle, violating the unspoken codes of trust and discretion that held their society together. The evidence Mary presented was stark and difficult to refute. It included love letters exchanged between Walker and Lillian that spoke of intimate meetings and a shared emotional life. There were testimonies from private investigators hired by Mary's legal team who documented specific dates and locations where Walker and Mrs. Boardman had been seen together under circumstances that left little to the imagination. This was not a matter of vague rumor or whispered gossip. It was a documented case, laid bare in cold legal language for the entire nation to dissect. The fact that the other woman was herself a married socialite transformed a private marital failure into a public spectacle of moral decay among the elite. It proved that the transgression was not a momentary lapse, but a sustained and brazen deception. For James G. Blaine's political enemies, this was a gift. They did not have to invent a scandal. They simply had to point to the court records. How could the plumed knight present himself as the moral leader of the nation when his own son was entangled in such a sordid drama, one that involved the betrayal of two families? The specific, named co-respondent provided a tangible villain and a concrete narrative of sin, making the entire Blaine family complicit in the eyes of a scandal-hungry public. This was not the first time James G. Blaine's character had been dragged through the mud of a national scandal. 6 years before his son's divorce made headlines, Blaine had been the Republican nominee for president in the election of 1884. That campaign was one of the most vicious in American history, a brutal contest where his personal integrity became the central issue. His opponent, Grover Cleveland, in the Democratic Party, seized upon a cache of damning correspondence known as the Mulligan Letters. These were private letters Blaine had written to a Boston businessman, which seemed to show he had used his powerful position as Speaker of the House to secure favorable land grants for an Arkansas railroad, later profiting from the sale of the railroad's bonds. The accusation was corruption, pure and simple. Blaine's attempt to defend himself was as dramatic as it was disastrous. He took the floor of the House of Representatives and delivered a masterful, emotional speech, refusing to hand over the actual letters while quoting from them selectively, proclaiming his absolute innocence. But his brilliant oratory could not completely erase the lingering suspicion. The public began to whisper a new campaign chant, a rhyming couplet that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Blaine, Blaine, James G. Blaine, the continental liar from the state of Maine. He lost the election to Cleveland by a razor-thin margin, with New York's crucial electoral votes deciding the outcome. That narrow defeat proved how vulnerable he was to attacks on his ethics. The Mulligan Letters had permanently chipped away at his image as the plumed knight, leaving a hairline fracture in the foundation of his public trust. When his son's divorce scandal erupted years later, it did not strike a man of unassailable character. It struck a man whose reputation for moral probity was already a subject of fierce debate, a man whose political enemies were already primed to believe the worst about his family. The divorce was not a new wound. It was salt rubbed vigorously into an old, unhealed one. The ink-stained presses of the nation's newspapers began to churn out a story they could not resist. For editors like Joseph Pulitzer at the New York World, the Blaine divorce was not a private tragedy, but a political goldmine. Pulitzer, a Democrat and a master of the new sensationalist journalism, saw his opening. His paper, and others like it, splashed the most salacious details of the case across their front pages, framing it not merely as a failed marriage, but as a glaring example of Republican hypocrisy. Here was the family of the so-called plumed knight, a man who preached traditional family values and moral rectitude, caught in a web of infidelity and betrayal. The headlines did not just report the facts, they amplified them, using bold type and dramatic language to ensure every reader understood the deeper implication. Could a man who could not keep his own house in order be trusted with the White House? The New York World answered that question daily, turning Mary's personal grievance into a powerful political cudgel. The story was perfectly tailored for a public hungry for drama, blending the allure of high society gossip with the sharp edge of partisan warfare. Every reprinted love letter, every testimony from a private investigator, was presented as further proof of a moral decay festering at the very heart of the Blaine political machine. The private sorrow of Mary Nevins Blaine had been successfully recast as a national morality play, and the entire country had a front row seat. For the Democratic opposition, Mary Blaine's divorce filing was not a tragedy, but a tactical windfall. They seized upon the scandal with ruthless efficiency, crafting a narrative that resonated with the strict moral code of the Victorian era. In speeches and editorials, they hammered a single, devastating question. How could James G. Blaine presume to govern the nation when he could not even govern his own son? The implication was clear. A man's authority in the public sphere was a direct reflection of his control within the private domain of his home. A household in disarray, they argued, signaled a fundamental weakness of character, a lack of the moral discipline required for the highest office. This was not just about Walker's infidelity. It was about the patriarch's failure to instill virtue in his heir. The Democrats painted a picture of a Blaine dynasty that was morally bankrupt, a family whose public piety was a sham hiding a private world of vice and indiscipline. They leveraged the societal fear of moral decay, suggesting that if such corruption could fester in the home of the plumed knight, it could easily spread to the corridors of power in Washington. Every reprinted love letter was not just evidence of an affair. It was proof of a broken family structure, and by extension, a broken candidate. The private failings of one man were strategically amplified to indict the entire Blaine political project, turning a father's private shame into his most potent public liability. The shadow of the divorce scandal made the entire Blaine campaign dangerously brittle. Every public event was now a potential minefield, every speech a test of a candidate already on the defensive. This heightened state of tension and desperation set the stage for one of the most infamous blunders in American political history. Just days before the election of 1884, James G. Blaine attended a meeting of Protestant ministers in New York City. One of his most vocal supporters, a pastor named Samuel Burchard, took the stage and delivered a line that would echo for decades. He referred to the Democratic Party as the party of rum, Romanism, and rebellion. The phrase was a deliberate, three-pronged insult, linking Democrats to the liquor interests, to Catholics, whose faith was often demeaned as Romanism, and to the Southern rebellion of the Civil War. For any other campaign, such a remark might have been quickly dismissed as the ranting of a fringe figure. But Blaine was not leading any other campaign. He was leading a campaign already reeling from the Mulligan letters and now terrified of the impending explosion of his son's divorce. His political instincts, usually so sharp, were dulled by the constant pressure. He failed to immediately and forcefully repudiate the remark. The silence from the Blaine camp was deafening, and his opponents seized the opportunity. Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and other Democratic papers blasted the story across their front pages, presenting it not as a single man's mistake, but as the revealed bigotry of the entire Republican ticket. They framed it as proof that Blaine and his party looked down upon the growing population of Catholic immigrants. Why did Blaine not instantly disavow the slur? The answer likely lies in the fog of a campaign fighting a war on two fronts. With his family's private scandal threatening to become public, his campaign was distracted, defensive, and clumsy. They were so busy watching for one kind of disaster that they missed another unfolding right in front of them. The rum, Romanism, and rebellion gaffe was not just an isolated error. It was the sound of a political machine cracking under the weight of a personal crisis. The Democratic machine worked overnight, distributing thousands of leaflets in Catholic neighborhoods that highlighted Burchard's words and Blaine's failure to reject them. On Election Day, Blaine lost the state of New York, and thus the presidency, by little more than 1,000 votes, a margin directly attributed to the mass defection of offended Irish Catholic voters. A single unrepudiated phrase, born from the desperation of a campaign under siege from within, had ultimately cost him the White House. The courtroom was a theater of quiet agony, and Mary Nevins Blaine was its reluctant star. For a woman raised to value discretion above all else, the act of walking into that public space to describe the intimate betrayals of her marriage was a profound violation of every social code she had ever known. She took the stand not as a wealthy heiress or a political daughter-in-law, but simply as a wronged wife, forced to lay her private grief bare before a room packed with reporters, lawyers, and curious strangers. Every detail she shared was a piece of her dignity stripped away. She had to describe the evidence she had gathered, the times her husband was absent, the whispers from servants, and the existence of the love letters that now sat in a court file for all to see. The air in the room was thick with judgment, and every word she spoke was scribbled furiously into notepads, destined for the next day's sensational headlines. Her world, once defined by gilded ballrooms and private drawing rooms, had been reduced to this, a wooden witness box where her heartbreak became public spectacle. The very act of testifying was a calculated risk, a necessary humiliation to secure her freedom, but it came at an unimaginable personal cost. All of society watched, and their gaze was unforgiving. The public and the press did not merely listen to her testimony, they dissected her performance. Was she too composed? Then she must be cold and unfeeling, a woman who never truly loved her husband. Was she visibly distressed? Then she was a fragile, hysterical woman, unable to control her emotions. Every flicker of her eyes, every tremor in her voice, was analyzed for its hidden meaning. For a woman of her class, public composure was a form of armor, and now she was being judged for how well she wore it, while being emotionally flayed alive. The ordeal was a perfect trap. To win her case, she had to prove she was a victim, but in doing so, she risked being perceived as either a calculating schemer or a weakling. Her testimony was not just about proving adultery. It was a high-stakes performance of Victorian womanhood under the most brutal possible conditions. Could she be the perfect victim, sympathetic yet dignified, wounded yet strong? The answer to that question would shape not only the judge's ruling, but also the court of public opinion, which was already rendering its verdict on the entire Blaine family. Through it all, Mary held her ground. She presented her evidence with a clarity that cut through the courtroom's oppressive atmosphere. The love letters, in particular, were devastating. Hearing her husband's intimate words to another woman read aloud in a monotone legal voice made the betrayal tangible and inescapable. It transformed the abstract accusation of infidelity into a vivid, painful reality. Her ability to endure this, to sit silently and listen as the most private tokens of her husband's affection for another were made public, required a strength far beyond what was ever expected of a society wife. In that moment, she was no longer just a pawn in a political game or a daughter of industry. She was a woman leveraging the only power she had left, the power of truth, no matter how ugly it was. Her day in court was a brutal baptism, a transition from a silent, suffering wife to an active agent in her own story. By choosing to face the humiliation head-on, she was not only seeking a legal divorce, She was publicly divorcing herself from the Blaine dynasty and its suffocating demand for silence. Her quiet voice in the witness box echoed far beyond the courtroom walls, challenging the very foundations of the political power structure that had sought to contain her. Walker Blaine and his powerful family did not simply accept the charges laid against them. They mounted a fierce defense, a counter-assault designed to protect the family name at all costs. Walker's legal team fought back with their own narrative, suggesting that Mary was an unstable and difficult wife, prone to fits of jealousy and irrational behavior. The implication was clear. Her accusations were not born of fact, but of a woman's hysterical imagination. They attempted to reframe the entire scandal, painting Walker not as a faithless husband, but as a man driven to seek comfort elsewhere by a spouse who failed in her domestic duties. This was a classic strategy for the era, attacking the credibility and temperament of the woman who dared to speak out. Behind the scenes, the Blaine political machine swung into action. James G. Blaine and his allies desperately tried to contain the explosion, applying immense pressure on Mary and her family to withdraw the suit. They pushed for a quiet, private settlement, far from the prying eyes of the press. The offer was straightforward, a generous financial arrangement in exchange for her silence and the dismissal of the adultery charges. They needed the story to vanish, to become a private matter resolved with a handshake and a check, rather than a public spectacle tried in the courts and the newspapers. For the Blaines, this was about survival. Every day the scandal remained in the headlines was another day of eroded political support, another day for the chants of rum, Romanism, and rebellion to be replaced by whispers of a son's infidelity and a father's failed leadership. But Mary Nevins Blaine refused to be silenced. She rejected the private settlement, understanding that a quiet payoff would leave the truth obscured and her reputation permanently stained by the insinuations of instability. Her refusal to back down was a monumental act of defiance. It forced the case to proceed, ensuring that Walker's infidelity would be proven in a court of law, a truth no amount of political influence could erase. This left the Blaine family with no good options. They could not control the narrative. They could not control the plaintiff. And they were rapidly losing control of the political destiny they had worked for decades to build. The very walls of their gilded world were trembling, and the foundation of their power was cracking under the weight of a truth they could no longer suppress. The court handed down its final decree, severing Mary Nevins Blaine from the Blaine name with the cold finality of the law. She was granted a divorce on the explicit grounds of Walker Blaine's adultery, a legal and moral victory that came with a steep price. The settlement terms were a complex web of financial provisions designed to secure her future while carefully avoiding the appearance of a punitive blow to the Blaine fortune. She received a significant financial sum, ensuring she would never want for material comfort, but the true cost was not counted in dollars. In the eyes of the society that had once celebrated her wedding, she was now a divorced woman, a permanent outsider. Her formal connection to the Blaine political dynasty was irrevocably broken. The invitations to the most exclusive Washington receptions stopped arriving. Her name disappeared from the society columns that had once chronicled her every move. She became a ghost at the feast, a living reminder of a scandal everyone was desperate to forget. Yet in this social exile, she found a profound, hard-won form of liberty. She was free from the suffocating performance of a happy marriage, free from the constant pressure to protect a political legacy that was not her own. Her financial independence granted her an autonomy that few women of her era could claim. She could now make her own choices, live by her own rules, and build a life defined not by her relationship to a powerful man, but by her own identity. This legal rupture was not just the end of a marriage. It was the birth of a new, self-determined existence, forged in the fires of public scandal and private courage. The divorce scandal was a ghost that refused to be buried. By 1892, James G. Blaine was once again a name on the lips of Republican power brokers. The party was looking for a way to reinvigorate the campaign to re-elect President Benjamin Harrison, and many believed the plumed knight's legendary charisma was the only thing that could save a struggling administration. His old ambition flickered back to life, but the memory of his son's very public disgrace was a political poison that had seeped into the soil, and it was now stunting the growth of his career. The whispers started up again in the corridors of power, not as loud as before, but just as potent. Could the party truly afford to elevate a man whose family was a byword for scandal? The answer came from the highest office in the land. President Harrison, a man known for his cautious and calculating nature, took a long, hard look at the political landscape. He understood that appointing Blaine as his Secretary of State, a move that would have positioned the plumed knight as his political heir, would be like throwing a lit match into a barrel of gunpowder. The opposition would have a field day, resurrecting every sordid detail of the divorce and the Mulligan letters, framing the entire Harrison administration as a continuation of a morally compromised dynasty. The political cost was simply too high. Harrison made the cold, pragmatic decision to freeze Blaine out, denying him the powerful cabinet position he so deeply desired. This was not just a personal snub. It was a profound political demotion. The man who had once dominated the Republican Party was now deemed too damaged to be trusted with its most visible roles. The scandal had not destroyed Blaine in a single, spectacular explosion, but had instead acted as a slow, corrosive acid, eating away at the foundations of his influence until there was almost nothing left to stand on. So did Mary Blaine's divorce single-handedly destroy a presidency? The truth is more complex than a simple yes or no. James G. Blaine's political path was already littered with obstacles long before his son's marriage collapsed. The lingering stench of the Mulligan letters had never fully dissipated, leaving a permanent cloud of suspicion over his financial ethics. And the nation was grappling with the severe economic turmoil of the Panic of 1893, a crisis that would have challenged any candidate. Yet, while these were significant factors, they existed in the realm of public policy and past mistakes, areas where a skilled politician like Blaine could still maneuver. The divorce scandal was different. It was a deeply personal, visceral blow that struck at the very heart of his carefully constructed image. The plumed knight was a brand built on moral authority and family values. His son's very public adultery, detailed in love letters and courtroom testimony, shattered that brand irreparably. It transformed him from a statesman grappling with complex issues into a patriarch who could not control his own household. This personal failure gave his enemies a potent, emotional weapon that policy debates could never provide. The scandal did not operate in a vacuum. It amplified every other weakness. It made the old charges of corruption feel more believable, and it made his campaign so defensive and brittle that a single unrepudiated slur about rum, Romanism, and rebellion could cost him an entire state. The divorce was the crack that weakened the entire dam. While other pressures contributed, it was this deeply personal, humiliating fracture in his family life that ultimately broke his political spirit and sealed his fate, ensuring the White House would forever remain just beyond his reach. Mary Nevins Blaine walked out of the courtroom and into a world that no longer knew what to do with her. She was now a divorced woman in the Gilded Age, a social category that carried a permanent, if silent, stigma. The glittering doors of Washington's most exclusive salons were firmly closed to her, and the society pages that had once celebrated her wedding now ignored her existence. Yet, this exile from the old circles became the foundation for a new kind of life, one built on her own terms. She never remarried, a conscious choice that spoke volumes about her hard-won independence. Instead of seeking another powerful alliance, she channeled her energy and her considerable settlement into philanthropy, becoming a quiet but significant patron of educational causes and women's charities. She moved away from the political epicenter of Washington, choosing to live a more private existence, often traveling abroad and cultivating a small, trusted circle of friends who valued her for her intellect and character, not her former name. She had traded the gilded cage of political fame for the profound, if quieter, freedom of self-possession. While the world remembered her as the woman who brought down a presidency, she spent her remaining years constructing a legacy defined not by scandal, but by quiet resilience and personal autonomy. How many other women of her era, trapped in unhappy marriages, looked at her story and saw a glimmer of a different possibility? Her life after the divorce was her final, unspoken testimony, proving that even a shattered public image could be remade into a private victory. Political dynasties do not collapse in a single day, but the scandal surrounding Mary Blaine's divorce dealt the Blaine family a wound from which their national influence never truly recovered. James G. Blaine, the Plumed Knight, never held public office again after 1892. His final years were marked by declining health and a retreat from the political stage he had once commanded. His grand ambitions extinguished not by a rival, but by a domestic crisis that eroded the trust of his own party. The name Blaine, once a rallying cry for Republicans, now carried the faint but unmistakable taint of disgrace, a reminder that even the most powerful families were vulnerable to the tremors of private life. The machine he had built so carefully over decades began to rust, its gears clogged by the lingering whispers of his son's infidelity and his own perceived failure as a patriarch. What happens to a political legacy when its foundation of moral authority crumbles? It becomes a cautionary tale, a story told to warn future generations of the dangers that lurk behind the gilded doors of the family home. For Walker Blaine and his siblings, the fallout was intensely personal. They were not just private citizens. They were heirs to a name that had become a national headline, and they carried the weight of that notoriety for the rest of their lives. Walker's own political prospects, which might have once seemed a foregone conclusion, evaporated entirely. No constituency would rally behind a man whose personal failings had been so vividly detailed in court documents and love letters. He lived out his days in the shadow of his father's unfinished legacy and his own colossal mistake, a permanent symbol of how a single scandal could derail multiple generations of ambition. The other Blaine children found their paths similarly constrained, their social and professional opportunities narrowed by the family's damaged reputation. Marriages, business ventures, and social standing were all filtered through the lens of the great scandal, a constant low-grade reminder that their family was now defined by its most public failure. The expectation to restore the Blaine name was an immense burden, one that ultimately proved too heavy to bear. There would be no second act for this American dynasty. In the decades that followed, the Blaine family slowly receded from the national spotlight, their story a stark lesson in the fragile nature of political power. Other families, like the Roosevelts and the Tafts, would rise to prominence, learning perhaps from the Blaines' very public, unraveling the critical importance of managing both public policy and private perception. The Gilded Age itself was drawing to a close, giving way to the progressive era. With its demands for transparency and moral reform values that the Blaine scandal had shown were dangerously absent in the old guard. The entire episode forced a reluctant national conversation about the intersection of private morality and public trust. How much of a leader's character is truly reflected in their ability to govern a family. The fall of the Blaines suggested that, in the eyes of the Victorian public, the two were inextricably linked. A crack in the domestic foundation could, and did, bring the entire political structure crashing down. The story of Mary Nevins Blaine and the presidency she inadvertently destroyed stands as a powerful testament to a simple, enduring truth. In the court of public opinion, the heart of a nation is often judged by the heart of a home. Victorian society held its public figures to an impossible standard of moral perfection. A man's entire political worth was judged by the perceived virtue of his private household, a domain managed entirely by his wife and daughters. This created a devastating double standard that trapped everyone involved. For a political patriarch like James G. Blaine, his son's infidelity was not a private family matter. It was a catastrophic failure of leadership. The public logic was brutally simple. If a man could not command loyalty and morality within his own home, how could he possibly command the respect of the nation? The son's sin was seen as a direct reflection of the father's weak character, a sign that the entire family structure was morally unsound. This is why the Democrats' relentless question, how can he govern the country if he cannot govern his own son, struck with such force. It weaponized the era's core belief that public authority was an extension of domestic authority. Yet, while the man faced political ruin, the woman faced a different kind of sentence. Mary Nevins Blaine, as the wronged wife who dared to seek a public legal remedy, was punished by the very same social code. Her victory in court came with a life sentence of social exile. She had broken the ultimate rule for a woman of her class. She had made a private scandal public. In the eyes of high society, her transgression of airing the family's dirty laundry was, in some ways, considered worse than her husband's original infidelity. A gentleman might discreetly have affairs. It was an open secret often winked at, but a lady was never ever to speak of them. By testifying in court, by presenting those love letters as evidence, Mary shattered the illusion of genteel harmony that her entire social world was built upon. She was therefore ostracized, not for being a victim, but for refusing to be a silent one. This was the cruel hypocrisy at the heart of the Gilded Age. The man who failed to control his family lost his political future, while the woman who sought justice for that failure lost her social standing. Both were victims of a system that demanded flawless public performances, no matter the rot festering behind the curtain. How many other families lived in similar quiet desperation, terrified that one moment of private truth could bring their entire gilded world crashing down? Mary Nevins Blaine was not acting in a vacuum. Her decision to file for divorce, despite the certain social ruin, aligned with a powerful new idea taking hold in the late 19th century, the concept of the new woman. This was not a formal organization, but a shifting cultural archetype. A woman who sought an education, pursued personal fulfillment, and dared to challenge the rigid constraints of Victorian domesticity. She was often depicted in newspapers and magazines, a figure who rode bicycles, attended college, and argued for the right to vote. Most critically, the new woman questioned the foundational assumption that a wife must endure any private misery to preserve public appearances. For these women, personal integrity began to outweigh social obligation. Mary's very public court case was a dramatic, real-world enactment of this new philosophy. She was a new woman with an old fortune, leveraging her financial security to do what countless women without her resources could not: escape. Her refusal to accept a quiet settlement was a declaration that her happiness and her honor were worth more than the Blaine family's political destiny. This was a radical notion that a woman's personal truth could and should disrupt the established order. How many women reading about her case in the papers saw their own silent struggles reflected in her very public stand? Her defiance resonated because it gave voice to a growing, unspoken dissatisfaction. While society might label her a scandalous divorcee, to others she was a pioneer, demonstrating that even the most gilded cage was still a prison, and that freedom was worth any cost. More than a century later, the echoes of the Blaine divorce feel unnervingly familiar. The same forces that converged to destroy a presidency in the Gilded Age, personal morality, media sensationalism, and ruthless opposition research, continue to shape our political landscape today. Think of the modern political sex scandal, a staple of the 24-hour news cycle. The core blueprint remains strikingly unchanged. A politician's private transgression is uncovered, often through the work of political opponents or investigative journalists. The evidence is then amplified by a media ecosystem hungry for a dramatic story, and the resulting firestorm forces the public to weigh private character against public performance. In the late 19th century, the evidence was a packet of love letters presented in a New York courtroom. In the late 20th century, it was a stained blue dress and recorded phone calls in the White House. The specific details evolve with technology, but the fundamental conflict does not. The question asked of James G. Blaine, can a man who cannot control his own household be trusted to lead the nation, is the very same question posed to countless politicians since. The Victorian standard of moral perfection may have loosened its grip, but the underlying expectation that a leader's private life reflects their public integrity persists, a ghost of the Gilded Age haunting the digital era. The media's role has only intensified. Joseph Pulitzer's New York World used bold headlines and partisan framing to turn Mary Blaine's heartbreak into a political weapon. Today, cable news channels and social media platforms perform the same function at lightning speed, creating an endless feedback loop of outrage and analysis. The opposition research that once involved hiring private detectives to follow a wayward son has now been industrialized, with entire firms dedicated to digging into the personal histories of candidates. The tools are more sophisticated, but the goal is identical: to find a personal weakness that can be leveraged to undermine public trust. What does this long history tell us? It suggests that the collision of private life and public power is not an anomaly in American politics, but a permanent feature. The Blaine divorce was not a unique historical curiosity. It was an early, brutal example of a pattern that repeats itself generation after generation, proving that the most potent threat to a political career has always been the enemy within the gates of one's own home. The grand brownstone at the corner of Lafayette Square stood as a physical monument to the Blaine dynasty. For decades, its elegant rooms had been the epicenter of Republican power, a place where senators and foreign ministers gathered under the glow of gaslight to shape national policy. Here, James G. Blaine held court, his charismatic voice weaving political strategy into the very fabric of the wallpaper. The house was not merely a residence, it was a command center, its doors always open to the powerful, and its library buzzing with the quiet hum of influence. Every detail, from the fine china to the curated guest lists, was designed to project an image of unshakable stability and authority. This was the sanctum from which the plumed knight launched his campaigns, a fortress of political ambition built on the bedrock of family unity. Then the scandal broke. The same rooms that once echoed with lofty debate about tariffs and foreign treaties were suddenly filled with the tense, hushed arguments of a family in crisis. The polished floors that had borne the weight of dignitaries now felt the frantic pacing of a father trying to contain a disaster. The house on Lafayette Square became a gilded prison, its famous address now a headline in every newspaper, its grandeur a constant, painful reminder of everything that was at stake. The very walls seemed to absorb the shame and the fear, transforming from a symbol of political triumph into a silent witness to personal tragedy. How many whispered conversations took place in that library, as legal strategies were debated and desperate attempts were made to persuade Mary to relent? The home was now a stage for two conflicting dramas: the public performance of normalcy and the private unraveling of a family's heart. Its proximity to the White House, once a symbol of its occupants' imminent destiny, became a cruel irony, a taunting view of a prize that was slipping forever from grasp. The fortress had been breached not by a political rival, but by a truth that originated within its own family, proving that no amount of power could insulate a home from the tremors of private sorrow. Even after the final gavel fell and the newspaper headlines faded, unsettling questions continued to swirl around the Blaine divorce like a persistent fog. The official court record provided a damning, yet incomplete, picture. We know Walker Blaine was found guilty of adultery, but were his indiscretions truly limited to the single affair with Lillian Boardman? Or was she merely the one woman Mary's legal team could prove beyond a shadow of a doubt? In the high-stakes world of Gilded Age politics, a full and honest accounting was often the first casualty. It is entirely plausible that other liaisons were quietly negotiated away, their evidence buried by teams of lawyers to prevent an already catastrophic scandal from becoming an apocalyptic one. The Blaine machine was powerful, and its survival depended on containment. What other names, now lost to history, were carefully erased from the narrative to protect other powerful families from collateral damage? The mystery of Walker's full behavior remains locked in the silence of destroyed letters and unspoken agreements. An even more tantalizing question hangs over the entire affair. How much did James G. Blaine know, and when did he know it? Was the plumed knight truly blindsided by his son's divorce filing? Or had he been aware of the crumbling marriage for months, perhaps even years? Did paternal hope and political necessity lead him to turn a blind eye to the rumors, trusting that the facade of domestic bliss would hold until after the election? Or was he an active participant in the initial efforts to pressure Mary into silence, fully comprehending the depth of the scandal that threatened to engulf them all? The historical record offers no definitive answers, only the chilling fact of a father's political ruin. This gap in our knowledge transforms the scandal from a simple story of betrayal into a deeper, more human drama of denial, desperation, and the terrible cost of ambition. We are left to wonder about the private conversations in the Blaine home, the frantic whispers between father and son, the moment when James G. Blaine realized that the legacy he had spent a lifetime building was being undone not by a political rival, but by the very heir meant to carry it forward. The tragic arc of this story shows a private heartbreak weaponized into a public execution. A single family's secret, once unleashed from the confines of their home, became an unstoppable force that shattered a political destiny generations in the making. James G. Blaine's fall was not merely a political defeat. It was a disintegration. The Mulligan letters had questioned his ethics, but his son's divorce questioned his very soul, his ability to embody the moral authority his office demanded. In the end, the scandal did not just expose a son's infidelity. It revealed the profound vulnerability of a system built on the illusion of perfect domestic virtue. This single event cemented a pattern in American history, a recurring tension between the right to a private life and the public's insatiable appetite to judge the character of those who lead them. From the Gilded Age drawing rooms to the digital headlines of today, we are forced to ask where the line should be drawn. How much of a leader's heart must belong to the nation, and how much can they rightfully keep for themselves? The story of Mary Nevins Blaine and the presidency she helped dismantle offers no easy answers, only a haunting reminder that the most dangerous political threats are often those that strike from within the heart of a home.